When I accidentally bumped into the hooded woman and caught her from falling, she looked at me with blood-red eyes and said I had initiated a feeding bond and would die within a month, and my first question was whether I could make the dying part easier for her. Marcus Cole sighed as he trudged down the dimly lit corridor of Station Alpha. Another night shift dragged on endlessly, his thoughts lost in a haze of fatigue. The station's maintenance issues seemed to multiply at an alarming rate, yet no one ever paid attention to his requests and reports. He was almost there, just 2 more supply runs tonight before he could return to the cramped quarters that passed as his home. With another yawn, Marcus checked his diet-pad for what felt like the 100th time. Everything needed was in order. Nothing would go wrong again today. Too tired even to feel hopeful anymore, he failed to notice the shadowed figure leaning against a wall ahead until it was too late. A moment later, there came an abrupt collision and thud. He stumbled back, his arms reflexively reaching out for balance, only to find himself holding on to someone else instead of merely air or whatever flimsy support had been behind him. "Sorry, so sorry," Marcus blurted out before he could think better of it, peering down at the woman in shock. She was slender and pale, with long black hair that cascaded over her shoulders like dark water. But what caught his eye were the blood-red eyes staring up at him. "Are you okay?" he asked automatically, already releasing her grip as if burned. Yet she didn't move away. Instead, she stood rigidly still, those brilliant red irises locked onto his face with a strange intensity. "You touched me," Lady Seraphine Nighthollow said, in a voice that was far too calm for the situation it seemed to describe. For an instant, Marcus almost thought she looked terrified of him, and he felt a shiver run down his spine despite himself. Was this just another maintenance issue? A malfunctioning AI, or holographic error? "I'm sorry," he repeated, taking care not to make eye contact now that her expression seemed to have darkened further by the moment. "I wasn't looking where I was going." His words faded away into awkward silence as it dawned on him how utterly ridiculous his apology sounded in light of whatever she might actually be accusing him of doing. But instead of escalating into a heated argument over who was more at fault for this strange encounter, Seraphine's eyes narrowed sharply. "Do you know what I am?" Marcus blinked, startled by the sudden question and the serious tone it had been asked with, slowly piecing together her pale skin, her red irises that seemed almost to glow in shadows even as they remained unlit here. And then there was also the fact that she kept away from light source. His mind scrambled for answers. "Vel'Keth?" The word slipped out before he could stop it. Vel'Keth were ancient beings known across galactic lore, creatures who fed on life force energy rather than physical sustenance. They hadn't been seen in centuries, and had always been described as solitary entities avoiding contact with others of their kind, or anyone else for that matter. Her lips pulled back into a hiss-like sound devoid of actual noise, but chilling nonetheless. "Yes." Marcus swallowed thickly, looking down at her pale face again, a stark contrast against the dark fabric covering most of it, and forced himself to ask next, "And you touched me?" She stepped backwards now as if she couldn't bear being this close anymore. Her red eyes were wide and filled with some emotion he couldn't name, but which made him feel like an intruder into something that had been left untouched for centuries. "You do not understand," Seraphine began again, more calmly than before despite the clear agitation in her voice now. "I caught you because I was worried about you falling." It felt as if each word carried a weight of its own while he said it. His heart hammered against his chest, but there wasn't any panic or fear coming from that. Instead, confusion remained dominant. He didn't know what else to say after all the stories and myths surrounding Vel'Keth vampires. Her expression twisted into something Marcus couldn't quite read. Frustration? Anger? Perhaps both. "You initiated a feeding bond," she said clearly, flatly, like reciting facts about an alien landscape rather than talking about his impending doom. "Bound to you?" he repeated dumbly, after her confirmation of the exact nature of what happened between them when their skins had touched only moments ago. Her eyes narrowed further. It was obvious that patience wasn't one of Seraphine's virtues now. "Your life force is connected to mine," she stated matter-of-factly, every syllable laced with ice. Days passed since Marcus' encounter with Lady Seraphine Nighthollow, and each night shift brought new opportunities for them to cross paths on Station Alpha. The station wasn't large, but its corridors seemed endless during quiet hours when most beings slept or avoided the darkened hallways. One such corridor was particularly dim, lit only by a flickering emergency light in one corner. Marcus' footsteps echoed as he walked towards his next maintenance task, and out of the shadows stepped Seraphine. Her eyes, bright red and piercing, darted around before settling on him with an intensity that made the hair on the back of Marcus's neck stand up. "Watch where you're going," she growled lowly without breaking her pace as she passed by him quickly, leaving a trail of cold air in her wake. Despite their initial meeting's tension, Marcus found himself apologizing again, sorry about earlier. Seraphine paused mid-stride but didn't turn around. She remained rigid and silent for what felt like an eternity before replying through clenched teeth, "I will be dead because you touched me." Marcus blinked in confusion as usual. He had no idea why her words seemed to carry so much weight yet lacked any sense of self-pity or sorrow from the speaker herself. "Well, I am sorry," he said again softly. Another night passed, and still another, until Marcus found himself wandering near Seraphine's quarters out of sheer habit rather than necessity one evening, after wrapping up his work for the shift. Outside her door, a small package wrapped in dull brown paper lay on the floor, food rations from the medical bay with the seal broken open. Picking it up curiously, Marcus noticed an attached note scrawled hastily, "Heard Vel'Keth can eat regular food too. Thought you might be hungry. Sorry again about the bond thing." Feeling oddly compelled by his own words that had been left behind on paper rather than directed at her person, he placed the parcel carefully outside her quarters before continuing with what remained of his nightly rounds. Day 3 rolled around uneventfully, until Seraphine found herself returning from an evening stroll in the station's darkest corners. Her path led straight to where Marcus worked late nights, trying desperately not to fall asleep on duty despite the near-empty corridors around him now. This time, however, she caught sight of his silhouette against another flickering emergency light nearby and decided upon a brief detour. "Marcus," she called out softly when he turned towards her approach with cautious steps. "What are you doing here?" He blinked again, an automatic gesture whenever Seraphine spoke to him, and replied almost reflexively, "Working my shift," adding sheepishly after a momentary pause, "Just trying not to fall asleep." She regarded him silently for several moments before shaking her head slightly and turning back towards the direction from which she'd come. But just as quickly, Marcus found himself calling out once more despite knowing better. "Wait," he said hesitantly, stepping forward into dimmer light where shadows hid most of his face, but not enough to hide the concern that had crept up in him about her welfare after leaving food for nothing. Seraphine turned back sharply at this interruption. "What?" she snapped irritably, without a trace of patience left behind on previous evenings spent wandering past each other like ghosts from opposing realms within one shared space-time continuum. Marcus swallowed heavily against the dryness building steadily inside his throat these days whenever Seraphine was around, but he pressed forward nonetheless through sheer force of will. "I noticed you weren't eating," he admitted slowly, after a momentary struggle with words that felt like foreign objects stuck in his mouth now rather than natural expressions. Her eyes narrowed further upon this admission, as if she were struggling not to snarl again at him outright for intruding even more into her isolated existence despite already having established some kind of bizarre bond between them against both their wills and better judgment. However, no sharp retorts escaped from behind the thin veil covering Seraphine's lips today. Instead came something softer, but equally guarded. "It doesn't matter." Marcus blinked once again, at this unexpected turn in conversation dynamics, before pushing onward regardless, through sheer determination born of his confusion and curiosity about a being so ancient yet seemingly just as confused by him. "It does," he insisted gently, almost pleadingly now, despite the absurdity of such an argument under any other circumstances. Another brief silence stretched taut between them, while Marcus waited anxiously for her reaction to these unusual sentiments, unusual, even if only within their specific shared context here and now on Station Alpha. "You're going to die," Seraphine said finally, after what felt like eternity, but was probably just seconds had passed since they last spoke. Marcus nodded resignedly, already well versed in this particular conversation topic between the two of them by now. Yeah. That part day 10 found Marcus in a state of perpetual confusion and curiosity, his nights spent worrying about Seraphine's well-being despite her clear warnings that he would die because of their bond. Yet again, she summoned him to her quarters, this time, not through some ominous aura or distant summons, but by an actual physical note left at the edge of his workstation. "Marcus Cole," it read in elegant script, "report to my chambers immediately." He had no choice but to comply. The moment Marcus arrived outside Seraphine's door, he felt a nervous flutter in his stomach that was becoming all too familiar. He knocked hesitantly and entered when she barked for him to do so. Seraphine stood by the window, back turned to him, as always, her silhouette stark against the moonlight streaming through the glass panes high up on one wall of her spacious quarters. She pointed towards a chair in front of an ornate desk covered with ancient texts and scrolls that looked older than time itself. Marcus sat down obediently. Silence stretched between them for several moments before Seraphine began to pace, every step echoing off the stone walls like heavy footsteps carrying centuries of unspoken histories along their paths. "Why do you keep helping me?" she hissed eventually without turning around. Marcus shrugged and looked away momentarily, as if searching through memories stored far back in time when his mother was still alive. "You need help," he replied softly, after a moment, eyes distant from the past resurfacing for just an instant before refocusing on Seraphine. She stopped pacing abruptly, her movements suddenly arrested by something she couldn't quite comprehend within this human who continued to act against all logic and sense of self-preservation. "I am killing you slowly," she stated again coldly, but with a new note beneath that tone Marcus could almost interpret as frustration or even perhaps curiosity. He considered it for only the briefest second before responding, his voice calm despite everything swirling around him internally. "Yeah," he agreed quietly, looking back up at her figure now paused in its relentless movements. "But until I am dead, I might as well be useful." His eyes brightened slightly with a familiar light of determination that had become an integral part of who Marcus was since his mother's illness took over their lives. "That is what my mom always said." Seraphine turned to face him fully then, her long black hair shadowing her blood-red gaze as she studied this man across from her desk, a human caught in the midst of ancient Vel'Keth lore and traditions without even knowing it until too late. "Your mother," she echoed almost softly. Marcus nodded once more, a sad smile touching his lips. "She was sick for years," he explained quietly now that they had crossed this unspoken barrier between them somehow over these past 10 days, however tenuous its existence might still feel in their reality. He spoke of the woman who taught him how to care, and gave her life so others could live theirs fully, until she couldn't fight anymore against the disease eating away at every cell within her frail body. "I took care of her," Marcus said simply before adding quietly, "She died when I was 20. A long moment passed as Seraphine sat down opposite him, finally, now that they stood equal on a shared plane of understanding born from tragedy and sacrifice, rather than bloodshed or fear alone. "You have been trying to follow her advice since then?" she asked gently, after several beats had gone by silently between them under the weight of unspoken empathy suddenly burgeoning forth where none should exist for beings as disparate as themselves within this cold, dark galaxy spanning their shared reality now. Marcus shrugged again, but his eyes remained steady upon hers, even through that veil hiding so much behind those crimson irises. "Yeah," he admitted softly, after another pause, reflective and deep, before continuing, almost as if speaking solely to himself about some long-held truths, only recently recognized amidst a whirlwind of confusion brought forth by destiny itself, twisting them both onto this path against all odds or sense. Seraphine leaned forward slightly now, studying him closely, despite every instinct screaming not to reveal any such softness in her demeanor towards one so very different, yet bound together nonetheless through an irrevocable bond born out of a simple apology offered on accident amidst shadowy corridors late at night. She spoke quietly, then, almost as if testing something within herself, or perhaps between them, that had no right existing, but did regardless now, like some cosmic quirk beyond understanding. "The bond does not have to kill you," she murmured slowly, words hanging heavy in the air before finally breaking free and landing gently upon Marcus' ears, who looked up at her sharply from his thoughtful silence earlier. "Feeding bonds are usually parasitic," Seraphine explained further, even as a sense of dread coiled tightly inside him around those harsh realities, but also hope began budding forth amidst such darkness too, fragile yet undeniably there, and reaching the galactic station buzzed with activity, as it usually did, a steady hum of engines and intercom announcements filling Marcus's ears, even during his late night shift. Yet tonight felt different. An eerie quiet seemed to Marcus, 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 Crath, Marcus, Crath, Marcus, Crath, Marcus, Marcus.